Welcome, everybody, to the very special season recap video edition of Always Bayern Chelsea. This is going to be our episode where we kind of talk about the season as a whole for both of our clubs, talk about individual player performances. And as I mentioned, it's on video, so go check out the YouTube channel, Always Bayern Chelsea. This will be up as a regular podcast as well, Apple, Spotify, just like normal. So welcome. Thanks for checking us out.
I got to make sure I'm not doing anything weird now that I'm on camera, looking right at that one over there. So for all the viewers out there, I will be on my best behavior visually and what's the word for hearing?
Auditorially.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah. So ideally with this kind of camera setup, we can still address each other. We don't have to address the cameras. They're just nearby.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hidden.
Okay, great. So with that, I guess we might as well just start and jump right into Bayern season recap, unless you have any other housekeeping notes to lay out there right away.
I guess I will maybe add a couple notes during the Chelsea portion because they relate to Chelsea. So no Bayern notes, I guess, except that Vincent Kompany is official. I don't know if it was ever official on our last pod, but he was in Munich yesterday, something like that. So important to note.
Yeah, today he signed a contract officially until 2027. So I guess big up to Vincent Kompany and welcome to Munich, my friend.
Shorter contract than Maresca got for Chelsea. Bayern, probably a tougher job as of now. So hope he does well. I think he's a solid guy, and we'll get to that later on.
Sure. So let's jump right into Bayern's season recap with that. And I guess just to start us off, for Bayern fans, it was a disappointing season. It was their first trophyless season since 2011-2012. Now, that being said, it wasn't without highs. We certainly had some highs this season, some good times, especially with our pretty deep Champions League run into the semifinals and essentially being minutes away from the final. That was definitely the peak of the season. But essentially, with Bayern Munich, you're going to want to be winning trophies. And Bayern did not do that this season. And they actually finished a pretty embarrassing third place in the Bundesliga with 72 points behind Leverkusen and Stuttgart. And obviously, you can't talk about Bayern's season without mentioning the absolutely incredible run that Leverkusen put together. They won all their Bundesliga matches. They only had one loss the entire season. So really congratulations to them. And it was, as much as you want to see Bayern Munich win, it was deserved.
I will say it was an incredible season for Leverkusen, no doubt. I can't help but think it ended on a sour note for them when they didn't win Europa. I felt like they were destined to just keep winning and winning. Maybe that'll be a sign of things to come. We won't get into that today, but as you mentioned, Bayern, disappointing season. You always want to be winning these trophies when you're Bayern. Frankly, you expect to win a treble every single year, maybe even more than that, which is crazy and lofty expectations. But at the same time, when you've had dominance at one club over years and years, it's something that you do expect out of your team. So I think fans are ready to turn the page on the next season. And I did want to ask you and just check in and remind myself I don't know if you know the date or the rough time of when you kind of really dove in as a fan for Bayern, because I know this is your first season as a fan, so I'm just interested to kind of rewind and see when that was.
Yeah, it was actually kind of in the midpoint of this season. So it was sort of December, I want to say, I guess 2023, and now it's May 2024. I guess it's not even as important to announce for this one, but we are recording this on Wednesday, May 29th, so the season has been over for a little while. But yeah, this was my first season as a fan and not even really a whole season. I went back and kind of watched all the highlights and everything from the matches that I didn't catch, but yeah, it was kind of in December there at the end of the year when I first started watching the matches.
And I think at that point, Leverkusen was probably at the top.
They were,
Or
yeah.
I,
Yep.
I okay, I didn't remember if Bayern ever was. I was assuming not, but I mean, yeah, I think the entire season for them was kind of one and the same, just not quite at the level that they expected to be. So
Yep. Yeah, when I started watching, Leverkusen was on top, and they were on top, but it wasn't impossible for Bayern to win, and even like if you think about the year prior, Bayern was behind Dortmund for a while, and then Dortmund totally bottled it. So, um, and even without the expectation of a bottle job, you have to think you're Bayern Munich, you're gonna turn things around, and that's actually kind of how I wanted to start talking about this season is the beginning of this season and for much of the season, even into the second half of the season, Bayern was looking all right. They were winning matches, but they were barely winning matches. And you have some people with the mindset of, oh, a win is a win, right? Like, take it, take the 3 points, whatever. But if you know Bayern Munich and I guess, what they should be doing, or what you could say they should be doing, especially in the Bundesliga, when you see them kind of barely eke out victories, you kind of start to scratch your head, and that's when you can kind of tell, like, maybe when push comes to shove, things aren't actually going to be that great.
yeah, there's some teams in the Bundesliga that if you're Bayern, you should be dominating every time you play them, and if what you're saying was the case, a lot of times for Bayern, they weren't putting their foot on the gas the entire match and dominating these teams. And I get Tuchel maybe didn't have a style that was easier to do that, but when you have a striker like Harry Kane who did score a lot of goals, you would have expected Bayern to score more and dominate more. So that's kind of an interesting piece as well. And you mentioned last year how they end up winning the league, but partially due to Dortmund bottling at the end. It's kind of interesting how so much did change into the next year, because now you have Dortmund, who did struggle more in the league but did better in the Champions League. Then you got Leverkusen, who came out of nowhere, Stuttgart, who maybe kind of came out of nowhere. So just so much happening this year in the Bundesliga.
Yeah, I should give out a shout out to Stuttgart as well, because they were on the brink of relegation, basically fighting for their lives, and now second place in the Bundesliga this year. But yeah, a couple of points there I'd like to hone in on, just to give an overall idea of Bayern's season 23-24. They were bounced from the Pokal early, which Leverkusen just ended up winning. They were bounced from the Pokal by a team that's in the second Bundesliga. And I guess for the listeners who aren't aware, the DFB Pokal is like England's maybe equivalent of the FA Cup. It's like the biggest tournament for all of Germany, not just Bundesliga, the lower leagues as well. So they got bounced from that early. If I'm remembering correctly, Tuchel didn't even play Kane very much, and he didn't play a lot of the starters. It was a very kind of strange decision in that one. And then I guess even before the Pokal, if you want to rewind, because it's technically part of this season, was the German Super Cup, which is the winner of the Bundesliga versus the winner of the Pokal. And Bayern lost that to Leipzig. And that was kind of right after Kane arrived in Munich, and he just played at the very end. It was another kind of a warning shot or a red flag for this season maybe not being all that great for Bayern Munich. So you have those two things. You have what I said before of Bayern, barely eking out victories. Sure, they were getting points, but they just weren't looking like themselves. They weren't looking very good or dominant. And as you mentioned, that's kind of Tuchel's style. His style was kind of to play a little bit more passively and then score a goal and then just kind of lock down after that, which, to his credit, that worked well against Arsenal. In the Champions League, he certainly put up a masterclass, I would say, tactically. Did that against Madrid as well, for the most part, until the very end when he kind of collapsed and the team collapsed and injuries and everything. But essentially that style of play in the Bundesliga just isn't going to work for Bayern Munich. You need to be the German machine. You know, you have obviously the most money to spend, you have the best players, you have world-class talent, and you have to be just, you know, a little bit more aggressive in the Bundesliga.
Couldn't agree more, and I think that's something Bayern will look to do this next upcoming season. I will say you still had a lot of great moments, as you mentioned, you know, beating Arsenal in the Champions League, which some called Arsenal frauds. I'm not going to name names who did make that correct prediction, but, you know, they had some great moments that I watched over the second half of the season, and things that you can look back on with joy, even against Real Madrid when you're thinking that they're going to go to the Champions League final. So certain performances by players or even manager Tuchel at times were great. So I think there's enough to build on for next year and momentum that will carry them through. And I think we'll talk about some of those things now because it's always still something you can hang your hat on.
But yeah, that's really how things looked for Bayern this year. There were a couple turning points. The 3-0 loss to Leverkusen in the second half of the season essentially was the dagger for the Bundesliga. There was really no hope in closing the gap after that one, just because you kind of saw Leverkusen and you saw that they weren't going to, falter. They weren't going to step on the brakes at all. So that was the turning point in my mind in the season. There were a couple of bad losses after that in the Bundesliga. But like you mentioned, we had super high highs in the Champions League. Coming back from the 1-0 loss to Lazio to make the Champions League quarterfinals, winning the second leg 3-0, that was a highlight for me. Obviously beating Arsenal, and then obviously becoming minutes away from going to the final against Madrid.
Yeah, those games were awesome to watch, especially as somebody who's started watching Bayern more and is a neutral but also a partial Bayern fan, and it was great to see Arsenal lose, and Bayern showed that they can compete. You know, they always compete in these big tournaments in Europe. They're always going to for years and years to come. So I loved seeing that. I loved seeing the team come together. It seemed like there was all this background noise at the time, and yet Tuchel, or maybe it was Muller and Neuer or directors, whoever, somebody brought them together. They came together as a team and decided that they're going to do well in the Champions League, which was awesome to see, even though they weren't doing as well in the league.
Yeah, I think that's really a testament to all of the above that you mentioned there. It's a testament to the leaders of the team, Neuer, Muller, but it's also a testament to Tuchel. And really all the players on the team, because, you know, it just showed that regardless of what kind of a season they were having, they had the talent and they had really the mental fortitude and the character and the spirit to be able to pull together and put up good performances when it really mattered. So, like I said, the season itself was a failure by Bayern Munich standards, but you did have some really high highs and some good key moments. So I think now I just want to kind of go through some of the players and talk about what I would rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. 5 being average on my scale. I know it's everybody's 1 through 10s are subjective and different, but that's what mine is. 5 is average. Above 5 is a little bit better than average. Below 5 is maybe a little bit worse than average.
And I like to step into the negatives a little bit as well. If I think somebody's really, really poor, or maybe I have a personal vendetta against them, I'll toss them a -1,000.
So your scale like just breaks after 0. It keeps going.
And if you're above 8, you're spectacular. Really tough to get 9 or 10.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, for me a 10 is like, I don't know what you could have done better. So, okay, we'll start this off with the goalkeeper, Manuel Neuer, who I'm rating an 8. He didn't play in the beginning of the season, had a horrific skiing incident, as I've talked about on this show before, where he broke his leg, had to be airlifted out of the mountains, and was really unsure if he'd ever be able to play again. And Neuer really turned around, and when he played, got back to form quickly and got back to that level that you expect from him, which is truly excellent. I guess barring a few mistakes at the end of the season, it would have been, these crucial mistakes against Madrid, a mistake in the very last match of the season. Barring those, it would be a near perfect season from Neuer, in my opinion.
Yeah, unfortunate that his season might be remembered for that fumble that he had against Real Madrid, because from what I always watched, he was a fantastic keeper and somebody that you'd love to have back there on your team.
Totally. I think he's going to stick around at least for another year. Maybe his contract goes for another year. Maybe he'll try to stick around after that. We'll see. He's definitely not getting younger, but when he's out there on the pitch, the team just plays better. They're way more confident defensively as a unit, everything. So moving on to the defense, I want to talk about the center backs first, because we've talked a lot about them on this show, but there might be some upheaval at that position, I should say, going into the summer transfer window. So first of all, I'd like to mention both Kim Min-jae and Diet Upamecano. I'm giving them both 5s. They played a lot in the beginning of the season. Tuchel basically ran them out there as that pairing every single match, and they were looking all right. I thought they weren't necessarily playing up to their potential, but they were looking all right. And then both of them had costly mistakes as the season ramped up in the Champions League, and you could say they also played international football. Tuchel playing them, the entire first half of the season basically. I'm sure it wore on them. It made them pretty tired, but they both made costly mistakes in the Champions League. Kim against Madrid and Upamecano against Lazio.
Yeah, don't have much to say about them. Interesting that, unfortunate, I should say, Kim sounds like he won't be playing over the summer and whatever he'd be playing for, because he's sick or something, or
he twisted he twisted his ankle in the last match of the season. That might be it.
So, but Upamecano will be playing for the French team, so that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and then essentially after those two kind of fell apart, I guess, to not hold back on them, Tuchel really had no choice but to play the combination of De Ligt and Dyer. And this combination was a really, really steady combination for Bayern Munich. Eric Dyer coming in over the winter transfer, which essentially for free. I mean, that was, I think, Bayern's best transfer, of that window. Ever. Of the winter window, we'll say. So I'm rating Eric Dyer an 8. He was really a rock for Bayern Munich. To everybody's surprise, it's a pleasant surprise. And then I'm rating De Ligt a 9. In my mind, he's Bayern's best defender. In my mind, he was last year and this year. I wish he would have played a little bit more this year.
Yeah, I'd hate to recycle a phrase, but I think going forward, Bayern could be in dire need of some solid play at center back.
Yeah, that was basically a key moment of the podcast, I think, when you said that.
I would say the most important that we've had.
Yeah. All right, so moving on now to the kind of outside defensive positions. I'm going to talk about Mazraoui. I'm giving him a 6. He was kind of injured for part of the season, but actually, he usually plays right back, but ended up playing left back for Bayern and did a pretty good job there. He had some good Champions League performances that I thought really held his own. So I'm giving him a 6. And then Rafael Guerreiro, who's another transfer who essentially came to Bayern basically for free. I'm giving him a 7. He had some really key moments in Champions League matches. He played against Arsenal, against Madrid in the first leg, I believe, before he got injured. But he's a guy who played in every area of the field. He played, on the back line. He played in midfield, and he even played as a left winger for a match.
Yeah, I know Guerreiro had some great performances when I watched. It's tough. A lot of those guys kept coming in and out of the lineup, whether it was due to injury or poor play. So good to see that they put in some solid performances when called upon.
Totally. And then I guess I'll say this first. Sasha Bouet, I'm not rating him because he came over in the winter transfer window, played one game, maybe two games actually, had poor performances. One of them was against Leverkusen, although he didn't play his natural position, so you could maybe blame some of that on Tuchel. And then got injured and didn't play the rest of the season. So I'm not really able to rate him for his performance at Bayern. And then we have to talk about Davies. Davies had a poor season. I'm giving him a 3. He unfortunately seemingly regressed, or at least hasn't improved, and he has such a high ceiling. But as we talked about at the very end of the year, he kind of played more of a winger offensive position and looked great. His goal against Madrid was really the highest I've felt in the entire season. And it was a brilliant goal, just such a good strike. I have to give that to him, and we'll see what happens with his future, if he's going to be sold or if he'll stay. But I'd like to keep him. I'd like for him to be able to improve and kind of reach his ceiling.
Yeah, in his case, any press is good press, and he's probably the most talked about player on this podcast, so good for him.
All right, so now I'll kind of switch over into the midfield. All the midfielders that I have listed here for Bayern, I'm giving 7s. And, some of the attackers could kind of play midfield, but as far as strictly midfield, I'm talking about Goretzka, Leimer, and Pavlovic. I thought were all solid. I guess Goretzka kind of had a down stretch in the beginning of the season, but really turned it around at the end. Leimer also looked like he didn't belong in the squad, and then at the end of the season, really held the midfield together, especially against Madrid, especially against Arsenal. That man can run. And, Goretzka as well in those Champions League matches. He's a real box-to-box kind of midfielder. And then Pavlovic, it's a shame he got injured and sick because he was looking like one of the best young stars I want to say in the world. Some people might disagree, but his stats are just through the roof if you look at passing accuracy and things like that. So I'm hoping for a healthy season for him next year. He could really take the world by storm, I think, and I would also like to give Tuchel props for kind of unlocking him.
When I was watching the games, all the guys you just named, I thought had really solid seasons. I really liked what I saw from Goretzka at times. Seems like he's a really great passer and connects a lot of the players on the team. I think Pavlovic is young, exciting. Looking forward to see what he does once he has a bigger role at Bayern. I will add, I don't know if you were going in this certain order of the field, but we didn't talk about Kimmich at all on the defensive side of things.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get your thoughts on his play. One of their solid players as well.
Yeah, good call. For some reason, I have him lower on my sheet here. But yeah, so Kimmich is essentially a midfielder, or he likes to play midfield, but he played right back for most of the season, at least at the end there. And I'm giving him a 7 too. I think he had a solid season, especially with the ups and downs of, Tuchel kind of calling for his replacement and then being moved to right back, which he has had some success earlier in his career at. Kimmich is another one of those guys who, and I guess Goretzka too, might get sold in the summer. I'm hoping they don't. I like both of them. I hope they stay.
I would advise Bayern to not sell both. Maybe you sell one if you really need the funds or you just want to go young or something. But if they sell both, to me, that'd be pretty shocking.
Agreed. Okay, and then moving on to Bayern's attackers too here. I'm not going to be rating Zaragoza just because I think that he didn't play enough for me to truly figure out what I could rate him. And then I guess I have Choupo-Moting on here too, and I'm rating him a 4. He basically was the backup striker to Harry Kane, so he didn't get a lot of playing time this year. But yeah, I mean, a clear regression from him just because he didn't play as much, and when he did play, he's not really at his preferred position, so he's getting a 4. I guess, and then I will talk about Gnabry and Coman because I gave them both 6s. Their problem this year was they couldn't stay healthy. these are two guys that Bayern is probably going to look to move on from in the summer, honestly, which is kind of sad because they're both key parts of the team for so long, scoring in big moments. And to be fair, I liked what I saw when they both played. I especially liked Gnabry. He just always seems to come up with clutch goals when you need it. So it was a bummer that they couldn't stay healthy. I guess that's the reason why they're not rated a little bit higher. They just couldn't stay on the pitch.
So if they're going to get rid of Gnabry, we only have limited time to get in our cooking session. So that's kind of a bummer.
Hey, we'll see. I think that they're going to get rid of one of them for sure, potentially both. So we'll see. I guess it's going to be up to company now.
Maybe not only depending on how much say he has, I guess we'll find out. But.
Right. All right, and then I'd like to talk about, we can talk about these two separately, but we'll talk about Tell. I gave him a 7 since he's my boy, as I say every single time I talk about him for some reason. He got, I guess, more minutes this year, but he's so young. He could be one of those guys who gets a lot more playing time in the future. Really looked good almost every time he was on the pitch. I thought he became the youngest person in Bundesliga history to get 10 goals. But yeah, unfortunately, Bayern's a little bit crowded at that wing spot right now, so he didn't get a ton of time. But man, oh man, I liked what I saw out of him. Goals and assists. I'm giving him a 7. And then I'm also giving Thomas Muller a 7 because he had some key moments this season. Again, started the season not playing very much under Thomas Tuchel, but injuries and things like that led to him being on the pitch more. And for some reason, a lot of coaches, this was like this with Nagelsmann too, I guess. He didn't play him very much at first. You know, maybe Muller isn't someone who necessarily puts up crazy stats all the time, and that's why, or maybe coaches can't figure out how to use him, and that's why he doesn't get played as much. But the man really is one of the smartest footballers I've ever seen. He does things that are really indescribable, and like I said, you don't see on the stat sheet unless you're watching a Bayern match. But, you know, one of my favorite players on the squad. I'm giving him a 7. He had some key moments at the end of the season too.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these guys, when you have a really talented team, as Bayern does, guys like Muller specifically, maybe even Tell, any of these wingers, you have to find ways and you have to pick and choose these spots where you're using them. Specifically for Muller, at his age, maybe it's balancing the amount of minutes he plays because he won't be in perfect form throughout the season if you don't balance that. Guys like Tell, when he's younger, maybe you're picking certain opponents where you think he can take advantage of them, whether it's because they're weaker or even if they're a strong opponent, if they have a certain tactic that he fits in better with. So I think when you have all these guys, it's really about managing that. And so we'll see what happens next year. But yeah, maybe at times this year for Bayern, they didn't know how to manage that. And certainly at times they were forced to play certain guys due to injury, especially toward the end of the year.
Sure, those are all good points, and I would tend to agree with you on those. Okay, so now we're up to Musiala and Sané. I'm giving them both 8s. With Sané, you had a case of he was amazing in the first half of the season. The Hinrunde, as it's called in Germany, looking like really one of the best players in the world. And then almost the entire second half of the season, really in 2024, for pretty much the entirety, he was just slumping badly, hardly scored. He was injured, dealing with pelvis issues, just like me currently. So I guess I feel for him, but I like to say I'm on the page of Harry Kane, you know, with his back problems against Madrid. I figure I can do anything if he played against Madrid with back issues.
You are the equivalent of Harry Kane, so
that's what we're getting at here. So man, I almost don't even know where to go from there. But yeah, Sané, you know, played through injury. Again, he was one of those guys that Tuchel just rode into the ground and played 90 minutes no matter what. So he ended up having a rough second half of the season, but still somehow showed up in key moments again. So, yeah, he's getting an 8. And Musiala, like I said, also getting an 8. He kind of also had a little bit of an up and down season, but for the most part up. He continues to look like one of the brightest young stars in the world, and I'm really excited to see what he blossoms into. I mentioned before, I think he's a little bit better as a winger. He, for some reason, tries to or likes to play the 10, seemingly likes to play the 10 a little bit more, unless you want to say that Tuchel is the one who was putting him there. I don't know. But yeah, Musiala, just one of Bayern's best players. I think one of the best young players in the world. Watching him play is a treat. Watching him dribble is just something truly magical.
Former Chelsea kid, so I respect him, and if you're willing to give him up, I'll take him. Electric player, I'm really looking forward to watching him next season. I think he's going to be that second star on the team behind Kane for sure. So that's going to be awesome to see. Like you said, a lot of these guys had up and down seasons on the attack, and none of them could quite match the ability of Harry Kane, but some of them came close at times.
Well, that leads me right into my final player rating. Harry Kane, 10 out of 10. I mean, the man was just a goal machine. And, you can look at the stats, see all the goals he scored, whatever. What's truly remarkable about Kane, in my opinion, is the way he is an all-around player. He plays defense. He gets assists. He, especially in Tuchel's system, drops back pretty often and is like kind of seeing the field in a way that few players really do and just coming up with some absolutely ridiculous assists. So I'm glad Harry Kane is on Bayern Munich. I'm glad I'm wearing his jersey as we speak. I'm not going to turn around for the camera, but you'll just have to trust me on that one.
I just want to add, I think Harry Kane had an unreal season, and I smile when I talk about him because he had all these achievements. He breaks these records, as you mentioned, but I would argue his most impressive achievement was that he somehow ended Bayern's streak of winning any trophies. Just unreal that he did that.
So here's a little sneak peek. There's going to be another video coming that I'm imagining up right now. I shouldn't say right now, but I guess right now, that I have been imagining up for a while, called Harry Kane is Not Cursed. And just keep your ears peeled for that one because I've got a lot to say about it.
I think we'll drop that one after the final of the Euros because my prediction right now is England will be playing in that. And here it is. They'll lose because Kane is cursed.
Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see about all this. Hey, maybe next year will be Kane's year to get a trophy with Bayern Munich. But man, I really rambled a lot more than I thought I was going to about Bayern. So I guess apologies for that. Let's jump on over to Chelsea now.
Jump we shall. And if I just gather my notes, which I have quite a few of, but
jeez, is this a 5-page paper?
It's what happens when you have some extra time in the office and you feel like writing some things down.
Good.
But, Chelsea had this incredible up and down season, and I felt like it was important to put a couple things in perspective. My overall thoughts on the year are that it was pretty solid. It ended up being solid. They had all these ups and downs. It was a roller coaster, as I've probably said a million times on this podcast. But to finish in 6th place after a putrid season a season ago, going up from 12th place, jumping up 6 spots, even though they were projected potentially to be, I think, in that 5th, 6th range, most people weren't really expecting it just because you don't know all this stuff going on with the owners. So, I think overall it was a great season. They scored way more goals. They only scored 40 goals last year in the league, which is so low. They ended up with a goal differential of 14, which was awesome to see. They gave up a ton as well, but since they scored a lot, it was an exciting year. They had all these exciting matches at all times. They made a Carabao Cup final. They made it to the FA Cup semifinal. So I think there was a lot to be proud of. I don't know from your perspective if you view things differently.
No, I would agree with you. I think, especially given the injuries that Chelsea had, they really put together a good run. The end of the season, especially, was incredibly exciting. Just to watch Chelsea, they had a ton of really exciting matches, whether that be roller coaster up and down matches, whether that be competitive matches against a City or some other team that's, really, seemingly has a lock on the Premier League or whatever. An important match, like you mentioned, those two, one cup final, one cup semifinal, which sort of seemed like a final at the time, although United ended up winning, so maybe I shouldn't say that at all. But yeah, I think that, like I said, especially given the injuries Chelsea had, they put together a solid season. Definitely some stuff to build on with the young squad. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I saw some sort of a stat, like if you took the Premier League just in 2024, starting January 1st, Chelsea was like fourth or third or something like that.
Yeah, so they definitely had a rough start to the season. It was kind of a mixed bag of expectations for what you expect. You have these huge injuries at the start of the year when you plan your attack around a guy like Christo and Nkunku, and then he gets hurt in preseason, and you get Palmer on the last day of the transfer window. You don't know what to expect going in, how you're going to score these goals. So that was very tough to start with, and that's why they started so brutal. That fourth place metric that you mentioned, I believe, was after Boxing Day, which is right around Christmas for those of you that are Americans and don't give a damn about that day. But, that's encouraging to see that they had sustained success for so long in the second half of the season. And I think you could really look at it a couple different ways because they finished sixth. They finished so strong. I could make the argument that they should have done better, seeing that they should have won that Carabao Cup final against all these academy players on Liverpool, but Pochettino decided to be all defensive and play for penalties. They should have won that semi against Man City probably in the FA Cup, a similar type match where they had these chances and didn't quite put them away. They should have had victories at home against Burnley when they drew, when I was in attendance, and away against Sheffield when they were up 2-1 and allow a late goal to draw against them. Sheffield being the worst team in the history of the Premier League. So there's those opportunities right there where you could say, okay, you get those chances and you have a Carabao Cup trophy, potentially an FA Cup trophy, which gets you automatically into Europa League, but you pick up those extra points in the league and you're looking at potential of Champions League depending on how things shake out. Now, I mentioned you could look at it multiple ways because you could also say that they had two really tough draws against Man City in the league. One tough draw against Arsenal, beat Tottenham twice in the league. They had these performances where they played above what they were expected probably, beating Aston Villa on the road at the end of the season. So you could also argue that they outperformed to some degree. So that's why I think sixth is ultimately the right spot to end for how they were deserving of it. And it's just crazy because this team is always full of surprises. And to say that they finished sixth, though, I will say I'm proud of what they accomplished.
Yeah, I think that they really just showed a lot of the signs of being a young team, essentially. Like you mentioned, they put up some really good performances against some really good sides, and then put up some piss-poor performances against some pretty shitty sides. So, you hope that they build off of that. You hope that there's some sort of stability, whether that be with the players, whether that be with the coach, which it's not with Chelsea this season, but maybe at least with the players, and maybe some guys come back from injury next year and you get, the Reece Jameses of the world, as we like to say, back and just leading the team a little bit.
Yeah, and we'll talk later in a later episode specifically about the addition of Enzo Maresca as the head coach, not manager, because we want him to just be a coach. But, obviously stability is going to be huge going forward, and I hope that's something they can establish in the preseason. But my quick review of the coaching department, obviously we had Mauricio Pochettino, and there was so much going on toward the end of the season that it's going to be tough to really analyze what happened over the year. But, they end up parting ways, as we mentioned, and that kind of shows that both sides don't necessarily see eye to eye on things. And you could see that throughout the season, whether it was things that Poch was saying to the media, whether it was Todd Bailey speaking at some rich man's conference in Saudi Arabia, or all these rumors that you hear constantly, I think ultimately it just didn't work out. I think he showed at times that he could be the man to lead the team. I think he's a great person, clearly, connects with the media, connects with players. I think players loved him, especially toward the end, unprovoked that they were saying great things about him when they didn't need to. So I also just think he wasn't a great enough coach to lead Chelsea to the heights that I'd like to see them at. He had questionable second-half tactics, questionable subs. His in-game management and adaptability just wasn't at the level that it needs to be. So if he had to part ways, that's kind of the way the cookie crumbles, and I'm only hoping that things can get better in the future with Enzo.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as far as Chelsea goes, I'm hoping that they can make lemonade out of lemons. Sorry,
Limeade with limes, we're saying now.
Yeah, man, we've talked so much about the lemons and Pochettino on this program that you might as well just go back and listen to all the episodes, or figure out, do a Google search and figure that one out. But yeah, I don't know. I think that Poch was leading the team on an upward trajectory. I think that he does have a ceiling. If you believe his training style was a key component in all of these injuries, maybe it is best to move on. The coaching market right now, it isn't looking great. It's looking like it, was maybe going to be better next season. Do you want the stability of a manager like Poch for another year? It's hard to tell. Obviously, the Chelsea owners didn't think so. So I guess now we can put that behind us, hopefully, and just get behind, for both of our squad's sakes, get behind our new guys and, roll with these young bucks.
Yeah, and as fans, I think you can voice your concern and try to voice what you want your team to do, but ultimately you need to buckle down and just get behind your squad. I think the players are more important than a head coach or a manager. Obviously, managers are super important. I mean, importance in terms of who we need to get behind. We need to get behind a coach, sure, but let's just get behind the squad and focus on what's to come. And it's a squad that I really think is going to be incredible going into this next season. And I'll review here, it was tough because the most important thing all season was the amount of injuries. Chelsea led the way in the Premier League the entire season with how many injuries they had. I mean, it was insane. Half of these players that I'll review here, I don't even have much to say because I just didn't see them enough. So it was interesting. Ups and downs with the team, as I've said once again, because every player, honestly, had ups and downs, maybe besides Palmer. And I'm going to start with the attack because they scored an insane amount of goals. It was fun to watch. And Palmer is that guy that led the way. I can't start with anybody else because he was the guy the entire season. They pick him up the last day of the transfer window. We're thinking, do we really need another right winger that's dominant with his left foot? But he was a spark plug. And without him, who knows where this Chelsea team would have been. And now he's a guy that they're going to build the future around. And I couldn't be more excited to see where he goes from here.
100%. I mean, as someone who vaguely watched Chelsea this season, yeah, he was the man. And, that's the same thoughts I had about Kane. Where would this team be without him?
Exactly. And Chelsea, they do have other great attackers. I think I'm really excited about some of the potential that they have going forward. Seeing what they did this season was interesting. It was definitely a mixed bag. You have Nico Jackson, who I think showed the second most potential behind Cole Palmer, would constantly make these great runs, had a great connection and flow with a lot of his teammates, but his season will be defined by him missing a lot of those chances that he ended up with. I'm looking forward to seeing how he improves on that next season. Similar to that, a guy like Misha Mudryk, who I love so much in my heart. He's one of my favorite players, but all he is right now is a flash of that potential. And he showed at times what he can be. So it's really going to come down to what can Enzo Maresca do to bring the best out of him, whether that's building up his confidence, similar to what he'll have to do with Jackson, or finding a way tactically to get him the ball in the best possible scenarios for him. And same with the rest of the attackers. Honestly, a guy like Noni Madueke, who you need to find ways where he can dribble past defenders, get into one-on-one spots to score. Sterling's the same way. A guy that's always been a high dribble and attack right at defenders. So that'll be interesting to see how you kind of balance that going forward. I think in this season it was tough because some of these guys would be injured, but then Potts just never quite trusted all of them at all times. He would pull Mudryk the next game after he had scored. Or a guy like Noni Madueke, he never quite started enough until the end. And I think that kind of created not the best situation for a lot of these attackers at times.
Yeah, and now the thing is, too, with Chelsea, you don't know who's going to stay and who's going to go. I guess in the offseason, there's going to be some decisions that are going to have to be made.
So I was talking about the attack for Chelsea, and a lot of these guys, it's going to be crazy to see what happens this summer. There's going to be decisions that need to be made. I've already seen that Enzo Maresca is going to get together with the directors and give his input on who he likes, who he doesn't like, things of that nature. The only other two I'll mention are Armando Broja, who played the first half of the year, then was sent out on loan. Didn't do enough to be part of the team going forward. They'll look to either loan him, most likely sell him, academy guy, so they'll get pure profit off of him. And then David Washington consistently made the lineup, but never really saw time, so not much to say about him. And that leads us to the midfield, which I've included some attacking midfielders, and then your core that really led the way for Chelsea. But for Chelsea, their midfield dominated in terms of minutes played and impact, I would say. And that's why I'll start with Conor Gallagher, because he played the most minutes on the team, had the most fouls in the entire Premier League at 83.
I knew he was up there. I didn't know he was the number one.
And next closest was 66, I think, so it really wasn't even close.
Jeez. Well, he was the captain this year for many of the matches.
And that's the key thing for him, is he was forced into this role where he had to step up and be captain. Reece James hurt most of the year, he's your captain. Ben Chilwell hurt most of the year and ineffective, he's your vice captain. So Gallagher steps in and is this strong captain and leads a team with the most minutes. I don't think he's ever going to be technically the greatest player on the field or scoring all these amazing goals. But he puts in the work, has a motor that really can't be matched by many other players in the league. And he just shows up. And I think that's important. I think he is effective with the way he can cover so much ground. He makes things easier for a guy like Caicedo next to him. I think they're probably going to sell him because they want that profit so they can get other guys. I'm going to miss him for sure if that's the case, because he was very important this season.
I thought he was one of the best players on Chelsea at linking up play. I guess especially that's kind of what you want to do in that midfield position, but I thought he did a really good job of linking the midfield to the attack specifically, which is what, a Pavlovic does for Bayern pretty well. I think it's a shame if they sell him. By all reports, that's probably what's going to happen. But I hope he goes somewhere where he can frolic and flourish.
I will say that if they do sell him, once again, I think they will. I'm not super worried about replacing him if we can stay healthy. And I'm sure we'll have an episode at some point this summer talking about what we'd like to see from our team. But I think there's enough guys that can replace him and have the potential to be, whether it's the number 10 in the midfield or a deeper defensive midfield spot, if guys stay healthy. And one of the important guys in that midfield that we'll need going forward is Moises Caicedo, who I think ended the season about as strong as anybody else on the team. Arguably was the best player behind Palmer toward the end. So strong defensively in that midfield. When Enzo left due to his hernia injury, Caicedo really stepped up. I don't want to say that Enzo leaving made Caicedo better. I think it just happened to be the case that he got better as the season went on. I think he's the most important part of the midfield going forward, and Enzo's certainly a part of that. But Caicedo finished the year so strong, had that amazing goal against Bournemouth. So he's somebody going forward that's going to be awesome with Enzo, because although Enzo had a tumultuous season, you can't really grade him because of that hernia injury. It's one of those that you're never going to be at 100% when you have that injury. And I think he made the right choice getting surgery so he can be healthy going forward, because he's somebody that they've already mentioned Enzo Maresca has identified as maybe the most important player to unlock going forward. So I'm looking forward to that. He's so creative, but he needs to also show that he can put in the defensive work.
Yeah, wow, that midfield is going to be interesting to see going forward with Chelsea. Yeah, I know there was a lot of ups and downs with Enzo, like you said, this year. I know there were a lot of rumors about him potentially being transferred at one point, that he kind of maybe put to bed with his nice little shirt celebration against whoever. I can't remember. That was so long ago at this point. But yeah, and then Caicedo really at the end of the season was the most exciting player. I mean, maybe outside of Palmer on the team. Like you mentioned, that goal against Bournemouth, and like just really the last handful of matches, maybe 3-4 matches, he was looking like a brand new man.
Yeah, those couple Enzo free kicks for goals, one of which him having that celebration was insane, and I'm really excited to see what he does going forward. You know, I'll mention a couple other midfield guys that we have as options going forward. Carney Chukwuemeka had a couple of really key, awesome goals. Ultimately didn't play enough to really say much about, but I'm excited about his potential in that number 10 role. I wouldn't say I'd like to start him, but I think he's a really good option coming off the bench. And then you got to make decisions about guys like Cesare Casadei, who was called back up from loan but never really played. Leslie Ugochukwu didn't play much. He's probably going to be a guy you send out on loan. And then I got to mention Romeo Lavia, because we snagged him, just like Caicedo, from Liverpool at the last minute in the summer transfer window, and he never saw the field because he was hurt. I think he's the number one guy you're going to look as your Conor Gallagher replacement. So I don't have a review for him for this season because he didn't play, but once again, he's going to be that guy you look to replace.
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't I even recognize that name from being on the pitch for Chelsea, and that's why.
Yeah, I mean, a huge transaction, at least 50 million euros kind of stolen from Liverpool at the last second, was on Southampton last year and led them, even though they got relegated. So that'll be really interesting. And he kind of leads us into the defense. He's a defensive midfielder, but defending-wise for Chelsea was crazy. No other way to put it. They gave up a lot of goals, I think the most in the Premier League era that Chelsea's given up. Tons of injuries again. I'll be brief with this because so many guys are similar. In the center backs, you got the man that I'm wearing his jersey, Thiago Silva.
Respect.
And he's old. He left the team now. You didn't want him playing as much as he did. He had a solid year. I'm not going to pretend like he had an amazing year because he didn't. He had a lot of weaknesses at his age, but he had to play more. I'll always love him, and he had a solid year overall. And then Benoit Badiashile, Axel Disasi, Elfie Gilchrist, and Levi Colwill, I'll kind of just lump them all in because they all had brief pockets where they would play, brief pockets where they'd be injured. They all showed flashes at times. Ultimately, they were all way too inconsistent for me. They're going to need to shore that up for sure. There's talk of bringing in somebody. I think they'll need to do that. Benoit and Axel for sure are both so inconsistent. I think they're guys that you want coming off the bench, similar to a Kim or a Upamecano for Bayern, where they make mistakes too often, but still show those flashes. You know, Levi Colwill is a guy who I envision as your left center back of the future, academy player, and when he wasn't hurt, he was our best center back for sure. And then Gilchrist had to play, even though he's young and is an academy guy, had that exciting goal against Everton where he raced into the crowd. But he's not necessarily an answer for you right now, and he was really playing because he was forced to. So those center backs, it'll be interesting. I didn't even mention Chalobah, who ended the season as your probably best center back next to Silva. And he's a guy that, similar to Gallagher, we might sell now.
Yeah, I think really with, like you said, with Chelsea's defense, inconsistent this season, obviously dealt with a lot of injuries, dealt with a lot of turmoil, but just has to be better. There were a lot of mistakes that were extremely costly, a lot of concessions that were extremely costly. A lot of times Chelsea would score and you'd be, on cloud nine for about 2 minutes, and then they would concede and, right back to square one. That's the type of thing that'll have to be buttoned up if they want to move up in the Premier League next season.
Yeah, just too many inconsistencies, and that was the main part I wrote in my notes, just all over the place inconsistencies. I'll give some flowers to two players, two wingbacks that had strong seasons. One that was a top 3 player all season in Malo Gusto. The fact that he had to step up and replace the captain of the team in Reece James was just special. No other way to put it. Showed that he has the offensive and defensive ability going forward. In the attack, had some great assists, and he's going to push Reece to be the best that he can be. And he might push him for a lot of starts. They're in Europe now, so there's going to be a lot of games where they're going to need both guys going forward. Just because I mentioned Reece, I will say that while he didn't get enough time, what he showed in flashes at the end just gets me, frankly, revved up, because if he stays healthy, which is a huge, huge if, watch out, because Chelsea's competing for Champions League and competing for a title. He's got to stay healthy. Same with Chilwell. I don't even want to talk about him. We'll see what happens with him. But the other guy I wanted to give flowers to was Marc Cucurella, because he started the year not the greatest. That left back position, you're thinking, who are we playing here? But by the end of the year, he had stepped up, and Poch had started playing him in this inverted left back spot in the midfield, which was crazy to see. I mean, Cucurella, toward the end, was arguably one of the most important players for Chelsea, so that was crazy. It's interesting because Enzo Maresca has this style where he inverts one of his fullbacks into the midfield, similar to that. It's usually on the right side. You can do it on the left as well in his system, and we'll get into that as it goes, because I'm already kind of getting excited about Reece James in that role. But Cucurella showed that he can be an important piece of your defense going forward.
Yeah, I didn't want to like Cucurella, and I think it was, maybe it's his hair flopping around, but no, in reality, I think it's because the first couple matches that I watched, he had some key mistakes. And actually, even more than that, just looked like he was out of position, looked like he almost didn't know what he was doing. But then, as the season ended, as you mentioned, he turned out to be this important piece, and I don't know as much about the formation changes that you're talking about, but I guess good for Poch if that's what he figured out there. And then, yeah, Reece James is personally the player I'm most excited to watch on Chelsea, even more than Palmer, even more than all these attackers that we talked about. For some reason, I looked into Reece James's eyes at the end of the season when he had that assist, and something about it just led me to to a golden road in the future.
Yeah, it's going to suck that he's missing, I think, the first 3 games due to his stupidity getting that red card. But definitely left back will be a spot to watch in the transfer window. I don't think Cucurella is the player that you can have starting every game at left back. He's just not strong enough defensively. I'll mention West Fofana because he missed the entire year, tore his ACL. But ideally, he's your number 1 right center back. Hope he gets healthy this year. Had to mention him because we'll see what happens there. We'll just end briefly with the goalkeepers. You know, you loan out Kepa, you sell Mendy, and then you bring in this guy Sanchez from Brighton, who had fallen off as their backup. Now you bring him in as our number 1. He never showed anything for me. Was never confident, not good with the feet, had some, frankly, poor attempts at saves. He gets hurt. You got this guy from the MLS, New England Revolution, this Serbian, Georgi Petrovic. I was excited at the prospect of that because MLS, that's the one position they've had some success at transferring over to Europe. And he starts off in the best way possible. Makes this penalty save in the FA Cup against Newcastle. We're all thinking, all right, this guy's a god goalie and he's going to be awesome. You know, and he showed what he was known for, which is that propensity for making a great save. I think he's got a lot of development in terms of his distribution, the way he passes to his teammates, and kind of the intricacies of that. And with Maresca's style, where you play from the back a lot, I don't know if he's quite the right fit. He tailed off toward the end as well, which was tough to see. I want him on the team for sure. I'd like Sanchez off the team. There's been a lot of rumors we're probably going after somebody else.
That's what I was going to say. I saw a ton of rumors about Petrovic being sold with the new coach now.
Yeah, just a lot of rumors about specifically this guy from Villarreal that we might bring in. I've even heard we might just get Leicester's goalie because Enzo might like him. We'll see what happens there. You definitely need somebody you can count on, and I don't know if Chelsea has that right now. I did want to just mention as well that I'll definitely have a pod sometime this summer talking about the young guys, the academy guys. I'm not going to mention any of them now, but I want to talk about their role in the future, how they did this season, and other guys that we had out on loan, because a lot of them might play a part going forward for Chelsea.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and really just a reason why you should be staying tuned with what we have going on, because as I mentioned, I have some video ideas in mind too, on Tuchel, on Kane. I want to do one on Company now that he's the Bayern head coach, and we really have a lot more to talk about this summer. So yeah, stay tuned here. Stay tuned for always Bayern Chelsea stuff coming out. We hope that puts a nice little bow on the season for both of our squads. And thank you for listening as always. Thanks for hanging in for this longer one. So yeah, I guess before I keep rambling now, is there anything else you need to throw out there?
You know, I think as I'm sitting here now with you, we almost should have had a glass of champagne or something, because it's really the first season in review with this pod, and your first year as a Bayern fan, you know, only my second as a Chelsea fan. So really, we should be celebrating in this moment because it was an awesome season. Things didn't necessarily end the way we wanted to. A lot of the fans wanted to for both clubs, but so much to look for going forward. You know, I think some of these summer episodes, stay listening, because I think they'll be some of our best work that we put out.
I gotta say, I agree. We're totally like hitting the ground running now. So stay tuned as always. Thanks for listening. Go Bayern.
Up the Chelsea.